Hi, this is Unit 13, Grammar Tutorial for Interchange, Book 2. In Part 1, we're going to be covering participles as adjectives, how we can use words ending in ing and words ending in ed to modify nouns. And in Part 2, we will be covering relative pronouns for people and things. Relative pronouns such as who, that, and which. Okay, when talking about present participles, when people see a word that ends in ing, they immediately think it's a verb. This is not always true. Sometimes it's an adjective, and it's sometimes the word will describe a noun. For example, Stephen King's books are fascinating. That means that his books are interesting. They're interesting books. They're fascinating books. So fascinating in this sentence is not a verb. It's not a verb. It's an adjective which says something about books. In the example with past participles, it's the same thing. In the example, I'm fascinated by Stephen King's books. Fascinated is not a verb. Rather, it's an adjective which describes how you feel. It's a fascinated you. You are interested. You are fascinated. So this is an adjective and it is not a verb. The last James Bond film was boring. Boring says something about the film. It wasn't interesting. So it's not a verb, it's an adjective. I was bored by the last James Bond film. That's how you felt. So it's saying something about you. Bored is an adjective. Bored is not a verb. The new Halle Berry movie sounds interesting. Interesting is saying something about the movie. I'm interested in the new Halle Berry movie. Interested is saying something about you. Now, one important thing to keep in mind is that words that end in ing describe things like books and movies. Words that end in ed say something about people. So let's take a look at some more examples. 1. Johnny Depp is a very amazing actor. Amazing ends in ing. It is not a verb. It is a word that says something about Johnny Depp. And Johnny Depp is a noun. So amazing is an adjective. Notice that it ends in ing, and that is why it is describing a person. A person is being described by ing. Before we said that things are described by ing and people are described by ed, but people can be described by both ing and ed. Objects can only be described by ing. Number 2, I find animated films amusing. Because it's an object, the animated film is being described by a word ending in ing. Amusing, which means interesting, something that makes you kind of want to laugh. So I find animated films amusing. Amusing is saying something about animated films. Number 3, I'm not interested in science fiction movies. This is saying something about you. You're not interested. You don't like science fiction movies. 4, I'm bored by watching television. You don't like television. 5, I thought Jurassic Park was an exciting book. Exciting is saying something about book. It's an interesting book, and we are describing it with a word ending in ing. 6, I'm fascinated by J.R.R. Tolkien's novels. You like them? You like his novels. And 7, it's surprising that horror movies are so popular. You find it difficult to believe that horror movies are so popular because you really don't like them. Okay, I want to talk about the sentence that I have on the board behind me to show you how we can use words ending in ing and words ending in ed to describe people, but we cannot use words ending in ed to describe objects. Let's take a look. Reading makes you interesting and interested. Now, what does that mean? When you read, you know more about the subject that you are reading. So when you talk, people think you're interesting because you have interesting things to say. The more you read, the more you know, and the more amusing you are to other people. But it also makes you interested because you want to know even more about the things that you're reading about. Let's say that you become interested in American history during World War II. And you start reading a book about American history during World War II, and after you finish it, you start to talk to your friends about World War II. Your friends will probably think that you're being very interesting because you know what you're talking about. Then you decide that you want to read more books about the subject because you're still interested in the topic, or you're even more interested now in finding out more information about World War II. So reading makes you interesting and interested. It makes you both interesting and interested. Now let's talk about a table. Let's say that you go to the store and you look at a table and you think, this table is different from other tables. It has a special color and it just looks different. There's something about the wood that it's made of. That's an interesting table. It's interesting because you find it interesting. You think that it's interesting, so that's what makes it an interesting table. However, you could never say that it is an interested table, right? You could never say that table is an interested table. You could never say that. And you could never say it because tables do not think. Tables do not have feelings. Tables do not have emotions. So it is impossible for a table to be interested. It can be interesting to people. It can be interesting to you, but it will never be interested, because to be interested, you need to be able to think and to feel. Let's take the opposite of our original example, and let's change it into not reading. Not reading makes you boring and bored. It makes you boring because you don't know anything, and so you have nothing to say. And it makes you bored because you have nothing to look forward to. You have nothing that interests you, so that you can go and find out more about it, right? So if you don't read, you're boring to other people, and you feel bored. You feel sad inside. Okay, now let's change it to our old friend, the table. The table is, let's say, you go over and you look at another table, and the other table is really cheap, right? And it's made out of very cheap wood, and the paint is ugly, right? So maybe you could say that it's a boring piece of work, but maybe you could say it, but you could never say that the table is bored. You could never say that the table is bored, because, well, tables don't think. Another example for objects. Let's talk about movies. Movies can be both interesting and boring, right? But they can never be, but they can be boring, but they can never be bored. So the movie Harry Potter is an interesting movie because almost everyone likes it. It's an interesting movie. People like the movie. However, you could never say that the movie Harry Potter is an interested movie. You could never say that it is an interested movie because it doesn't think. Let's say that, I don't know, some people say that Star Trek movies are boring. Well, you could say that because some people don't like Star Trek movies. However, you could never say that the Star Trek movie is bored. Because to be bored, you need to be a person. You need to think and you need to have emotions. So the Star Trek movie it's possible that the Star Trek movie is boring, but it can never be bored. Okay, now let's talk about relative clauses. Relative clauses begin with relative pronouns. In a previous unit, you studied relative clauses that began with when. You talked about Thanksgiving Day is a day when people celebrate the harvest. Christmas Day is a day when people celebrate the birth of Christ. Now we're going to go over relative pronouns that begin with who, relative pronouns that begin with that, and relative pronouns that begin with which. For example, he's an actor. He won 2 Oscars. We have 2 sentences, but we can combine the 2 sentences into one with the relative pronoun who. He's an actor who won 2 Oscars. Now, if you really want to be formal, when you're talking about a person, use the relative pronoun who. If you're in an informal situation, you can use the relative pronoun that for people. So you can also say, he's an actor that won 2 Oscars. Now notice that in the sentence, he's an actor who won 2 Oscars, you still have 2 clauses. The first one is independent. He's an actor, right? That's a complete idea. And the second part of the sentence is who won 2 Oscars. That's not a complete idea. That's a dependent clause. And it does not stand alone, and it has to go with an independent clause, right? So you have 2 clauses, remember, independent clauses and dependent clauses. Independent clauses are complete ideas. Dependent clauses are not complete ideas. He's an actor who won 2 Oscars. You have he's an actor. That's a complete idea. And you have that won 2 Oscars. That's not a complete idea. Now, when you're talking about things, you can use which or that. For example, it's a movie. It stars Kate Winslet. We can combine those 2 sentences into it's a movie that stars Kate Winslet, or it's a movie which stars Kate Winslet. If you really want to know the difference between which and that, it's a minor difference and it involves choosing. If you're choosing, use which is better. If you're not choosing, then you can use that. But it's a minor difference. Okay, let's talk about some other examples. If I have 2 sentences, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is a video game. It's fun for all ages. I can combine the 2 sentences with Super Mario Galaxy 2 is a video game that's fun for all ages. Jodie Foster is an actress. She began her career at age 3. Well, Jodie Foster is a person. So I'm going to use who. I'm going to go with who. Jodie Foster is an actress who began her career at age 3. Ben Affleck is an actor. He's also a director. Again, we're talking about a person. Ben Affleck is an actor who is also a director. Now, could I say that Ben Affleck is an actor that is also a director? Yes, I can. But in informal situations, if you're taking a test, if you're taking a standardized test or something, or you're in a formal situation, do not use that with people. Use who with people. The Lorax is a film. It was adapted from a children's book. So The Lorax is a film that was adapted from a children's book. Jaden Smith is an actor. He's the son of Will Smith. Jaden Smith is an actor who is the son of Will Smith. Okay, some more examples. I like people who are nice. I like people who are helpful. People who like to help others. I like people who are not conceited. Conceited means a person who thinks he is the best. Conceited. Okay? So people who think they are the best are conceited. Okay? So I like people who do not think they are the best. I like people who are not conceited. I like people who are hard workers. I like people who are fun to be around. I like people who are funny. Now remember that the difference between fun and funny is that a fun person is nice to be around, and a funny person makes you laugh. So a fun person, he or she is nice to be around, but maybe not in a comical sort of way. So I like both. I like people who are fun, and I like people who are funny. Now, what is the opposite of like? What is the opposite of like? The opposite of like is dislike. The opposite of like is dislike. So I dislike people who are conceited. I dislike people who are lazy. I dislike people who are not nice. What would be the opposite of not nice? Maybe a person who is rude. Okay? A person who is rude is not nice. The person is impolite. Impolite. So I dislike people who are rude. I dislike people who try to take advantage of you. I dislike people who are not honest. I dislike people who are not honest. I dislike people who talk about you behind your back, maybe. People who talk about you behind your back are people who never say anything in your face. They wait until you leave the room and then they start to say bad things about you. So they talk about you behind your back. I dislike people who talk about you behind your back. Let's talk about movies now. I don't like movies that do not have a good plot. The plot of a movie is the story. The story of the movie. So I don't like movies that don't have a good plot. I don't like movies that have no action. I don't like movies that have no action or that have little action. I don't like movies that are based on fantasy. I don't like movies that are based on fantasy, like Harry Potter or maybe The Lord of the Rings. I like movies that are based on science. I like movies that are based on science fiction, like Star Trek and Star Wars. I like movies that have a lot of action, like The Transporter, like Rambo. I like movies that have a historical setting. I like movies that have a historical setting, and a setting is the location of a movie or a book. What is the setting of the movie? What is the setting of the book? I like a movie that has a historical setting because you learn stuff about that period in history at the same time that you're getting entertained. So after the movie, you can Google the historical period and learn some more about that historical period. I like movies that contain a lot of special effects. Special effects nowadays are really out of control. They are fantastic and they're getting better every day at special effects. So I enjoy movies that have really good special effects. Okay, so this is the end of the grammar tutorial for Unit 13, Interchange, Book 2. In this tutorial, in the first part, we talked about participles to describe nouns, and we said that there are ing participles and there are ed participles, and that people can be described with both ing and ed participles. We also said that objects can only be described by ing participles. In part 2, we talked about relative pronouns. Specifically, we talked about who, that, and which, and we gave several examples with each of those relative pronouns.